Welcome to Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort, a local Champaign-Urbana peace group. I'm Carl Estabrook. My discussant today is our favorite Republican, Ed Mandel. We're recording this at midday on Tuesday, April 16th, in the studios for Urbana Public Television. We begin with wars and rumors of war. A good letter in the News Gazette this morning is worth your attention. It has a headline. The headlines are provided by the editors, of course, and don't always say much about what the content is. The headline is "Take Close Look at Terror Claim." Okay, what's she talking about here? The Trump administration's designation of Iran's Guardians of the Revolution military corps as a, quote, terrorist organization is nothing but a Machiavellian ploy to invoke the Authorization for the Use of Military Force resolutions passed by the American Congress, to attack Iran under the guise of fighting terrorism. The two AUMFs, these congressional resolutions, had been crafted in 2001 and 2002 to give the Bush administration a free hand to wage its war on terror. And, of course, to invade Iraq. It's no coincidence that the administration is designating of the IGRC, that is the Iranian Guardians of the Revolution Corps. It's no coincidence that the American administration's designation of the IGRC as a terrorist organization has come on the heels of Congress resurrecting the War Powers Act to end the U.S. unauthorized involvement in the Saudi and United Arab Emirates military assault on Yemen. Rather than risking another congressional invocation of the War Powers Act that could undermine its military plans against Iran, the administration has resorted to a fabrication to sell its campaign as an integral part of the war on terror, and hence legal under AUMF. We must demand that Congress reject the administration's claim and scrutinize the legality of military operations against Iran under WPA, War Powers Act. In fact, they're highly illegal. We would otherwise be dragged into another never-ending war whose intended outcome is not to liberate Iran from the rule of the clerics, but to make Iran ungovernable and unable to counterbalance Israel and Saudi Arabia's hegemonic ambitions in the Middle East. Such a war would not only wreak havoc on the Iranian people, but would also come at high human and financial costs to ordinary Americans. This seems to me to be exactly right, and it needs to be understood what the American government is up to in this designation of this Iranian military unit as terrorists. This letter in this morning's News Gazette is signed by Nilufar Shambayata, and I think it's one of the clearest observations on this point that we've seen in a while. Meanwhile, while the Trump administration is making covert plans to attack Iran, it's also considering military action against Venezuela. On Wednesday, the Center for Strategic International Studies, it's a Washington, D.C. think tank, hosted an off-the-record event during which a number of President Trump's highest-ranking advisors discussed the possibility of a U.S. military attack on Venezuela. This included a number of State Department and National Security Council officials, along with officials dispatched from Colombian and Brazilian embassies. Representatives of U.S.-backed Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido, that is Washington's boy in Venezuela, also took part. Details of what was discussed have not been disclosed, above and beyond the general possibility of the U.S. attacking Venezuela militarily, and the different Venezuela is under American attack in covert ways right now, including trade embargoes and interference with the electrical system and so forth. that the Trump administration is considering attacking Venezuela as an option is no secret, as they tell reporters that much at seemingly every opportunity. That they're holding such events to discuss the details, however, suggests a U.S. war may be closer than anyone realizes. And a third example of U.S. war making at the moment, shocking and illegal as it is, causes the group Just Foreign Policy to urge people who follow their accounts to urge President Trump not to veto the bill to end the Yemen war. Many Americans who deeply dislike President Trump have trouble wrapping their heads around the idea that he might ever do anything good. But now there's a possibility that Trump might do the right thing to end the U.S. role in the Saudi war in Yemen, and that would save the lives of many Yemeni children and their parents. Congress has passed a law, the Bernie Sanders, Mike Lee, Chris Murphy Yemen War Powers Resolution, to end unconstitutional U.S. participation in the Saudi war in Yemen, which is causing the worst humanitarian crisis in the world. According to a recent report in the Washington Examiner, Trump might not veto the bill. The Examiner reported President Trump is considering signing legislation that would end the U.S. role in Yemen's stalemated civil war after his advisors urged him to veto the bill. Although White House advisors urged a veto, potentially Trump's second veto of his term, Trump expressed open-mindedness last Thursday, telling reporters, "I'll look at it." Since then, he's made no public remarks amid behind-the-scenes lobbying. Former Representative Dennis Kucinich said he's optimistic Trump either will sign the resolution or allow it to take effect without his signature, which would happen 10 days after it's formally presented. Quote, "I'm hopeful that the thinking that he demonstrated in his 2016 campaign is going to prevail," said Kucinich, who led a group of lawmakers in suing then-President Barack Obama for intervening in Libya's civil war in 2011. If there's anything we can reasonably do to encourage Trump not to veto the bill to end the Yemen war, basic morality requires that we do it. Urge Trump not to veto the bill to end the Yemen war by calling the White House comment line. You can call the White House and leave a message or express an opinion. The number is 202-456-1111. 202-456-1111. And that gets you usually a recording that allows you to leave a message. And the message now should be to President Trump not to veto the Congress's expression of its resolution to end the U.S. involvement in the vicious war that Saudi Arabia is carrying on against Yemen. The Just Foreign Policy group that circulates this memo says, here's a possible script for what you might say to the White House recording machine. Say, "Hello, my name is such and such. I'm calling from Champaign-Urbana. I urge President Trump to sign the bipartisan Yemen War Powers Resolution that just passed Congress. I ask that the President meet with Representative Khanna and the bipartisan congressional delegation that requested a meeting to discuss this legislation before President Trump makes any final decision on whether to sign it." Close quote. WikiLeaks founder Julian Assange has been arrested in London, and we want to talk about that as the program goes on. You're listening to Aware on the Air, and we're talking about the various events this week that presage more American war making. Most Americans are not aware that the U.S. is actually carrying on a war in eight countries around the world and continuing war provocations against Russia and China. We keep quiet about that. But these specific ones that we've mentioned here, Venezuela, Iran, and Yemen, are worth your attention this week. The U.S. is committing great crimes here, and it's up to Americans to call upon their government to stop doing so. Go ahead, Ed.
I wonder if I ask you a question. I don't mean to sound naive here, sorry, but I mean the United States involvement in Venezuela. I mean, I understand the concept of the Monroe Doctrine, which we arbitrarily passed was it
Right.
200 years ago, not for foreign powers not to get involved with in the Western Hemisphere. But here, where we also seem to be concerned, also if other countries get involved with our with our process, with our government, with our existence. I mean, here, our political, the elections and the electoral system. Here, we're invading Venezuela, and obviously we're trying to control their system. And it doesn't seem any concern or at least in the political about our involvement in their system. So how do they justify this?
Well,
I mean, it's like you understand that there's a contradiction here.
the contradiction is obvious, it's blatant, and it's the notion that the U.S. Simply can dictate the behavior of other countries when it's in the interest of the American 1% to do so is the shocking principle upon which American policy is being run. Venezuela is a fine example. There's a good reason that the U.S. is interested in Venezuela. Venezuela has the largest proved oil reserves
Right.
in the world.
Right.
And American foreign policy, which doesn't change that much from year to year or even from administration to administration, American foreign policy for a long, long time has been based on the notion that has included the notion that if we can control the flow of energy, and that's primarily gas and oil, we can control the flow of energy around the world, we can control the behavior of these economies, and that's what we're really interested in, that depend upon the worldwide flow of gas and oil, everyone from Germany to China. And so the U.S., I mean, that's the fundamental reason that the U.S. is as deeply involved in the Middle East as it is. The real reason we're interested in the Middle East is because that's where the energy comes from. Mm-hmm. And if we control the energy, we can control behavior of these other countries, mainly keep them from interfering with the American economic control of the world, what we call globalism. And it's a defense of globalism that the U.S., for more than a century, has demanded control of the flows of energy. We're interested in Venezuela because of the oil.
Well, technically, there's a lot of minerals in Africa.
Yep.
So I mean, I would have thought, obviously there would be wars all over the place in Africa to try to protect certain minerals so that they can't be used. We have exclusive use over those minerals.
That's a very important point, and it's a point that has not been recognized or commented upon in American media very much.
I seem to recall it was important like several decades ago. I remember reading an article a long time ago mentioned about that, and I thought about it, and at the time I never took it seriously, but now in retrospect, yeah, I mean that's the reason why there are all sorts of things like the colonization of different different governments in Africa, and also the horrible things that happen.
Of all the different states in Africa,
yeah.
There are only two that do not have an American military presence. Mm-hmm. That's quite remarkable. Mm-hmm. I mean, that really is a development of this last generation of all the American administrations.
So there is an effort
Republican and Democrat.
So there is an effort subliminal below the scenes to control the mineral rights of
that's part of it.
Yeah.
The rest of it is the control of the African economy. The economy of the African states in general.
Yeah.
The U.S. Sees a challenge from China and China's development of what it calls the Belt and Road Initiative, the New Silk Road, which is an enterprise that the Chinese government has undertaken to establish communications and trade relations around the world. We have to remember that the very heart of American foreign policy is a determination that Eurasia, Europe and Asia, should not be integrated economically and developed economically in such a way that they may challenge America's ability to exploit the entire region.
Yeah.
Now, what's happened, of course, is that in the last generation and more, China and Russia in spite of these American attempts to control the world economy, have together, and often together, worked out various arrangements with third world countries, such as the African states you were talking about. The Americans have replied with military force. Yeah. The U.S. is carrying on a war in Somalia. The U.S. has defended South African apartheid, not because we had any particular concerns about the internal aspects of South Africa, except for the economic ones you mentioned, but because that was a way to stymie the involvement of China and Russia in Africa, and that policy has extended throughout the African continent. And so we have this conflict that is occasionally acknowledged by Washington, in which Washington sends the military and China sends economic development. That is the overall shape of American foreign policy these days, and it's extremely dangerous for
I would also
reasons.
think it's to our benefit, I guess, at least to the benefit of the United States government, but to stimulate the Chinese economy, because that's our consumers and the new consumer, whatever. But that's a whole other issue.
It's a matter of competition, I think.
Right,
I mean, the U.S. would be very happy to have a Chinese economy that was clearly subservient to the American economy, and we thought we had such an arrangement with Russia after the fall of the Soviet Union, and the U.S. Ability to colonize Russia economically, and in the reign of the drunkard Boris Yeltsin, and reduce. There were very conscious plans by the Clinton administration to reduce Russia to the status of a third world country, presiding raw materials, such as you mentioned, to a worldwide economy run by the American 1%. Now, what's happened? The reason Putin is so hated in Washington is that he stymied that. He stopped that. He reversed that.
He's not drinking enough.
And the ability of Washington to dictate that subsidiary economic role to Russia was stymied by the Putin regime. And that remains fundamental to American foreign policy right now, and the source of the hysteria, including Russiagate, but not limited to Russiagate, the hysteria with which the U.S. treats Russia these days.
Okay, so if you want to go in a different direction here, because there are other issues that are extremely important. If you want to discuss the Notre Dame fire, I guess, I don't know if you want to go there next, that's important.
It's shocking, and it's interesting the extent to which there is a sort of worldwide outrage such a thing could happen. There are aspects of it that have to do with the worldwide economy. That
have you heard rumors that it might be arson?
Well, it's been suggested that the French government now said today that it was not an arson fire. In fact, one of the places, although there have been attempts at arson at French notable sites, arson attributed to ISIS and to other groups, strangely enough, I've yet to see in the French press or the international press suggestions that the fire at Notre Dame was related to the Gilets jaunes, the yellow vests, and the ongoing protest against the French government. But there's an aspect of this that actually may be related to that. The French government, under the presidency of Macron, has a major project of rebuilding, reconstructing Notre Dame underway when the fire broke out. The project was in accord with the neoliberal principles of the Macron government. The project was not being conducted by the French state, but by private corporations. You had private construction groups who were rebuilding this 900-year-old structure from the inside, and the suggestion is that they're the ones who are responsible for the fire. Now, the political dimension of that is that greater state control which would fly in the face of the neoliberal principles of the government, might have prevented such a thing. So there's a lot to be said yet about how this tragedy occurred.
I hear there have been reports of hundreds of other fires that have been having of churches, I mean, all over the place, and different vandalism. So even if the Notre Dame itself was an accident, there are still a lot of fires happening or incidents happening all over the place that should be a cause of concern.
You're absolutely right.
But I'm just curious whether what would your reaction to that.
No, it's true, and it's also not clear where this is coming from. How much of this is bound up with France's role in the Middle East? How much is bound up with France's opposition to the populist uprising that the Yellow Vests represent, and other possibilities as well? I mean, I expect a further discussion of the matter in coming weeks. It'll be interesting to see whether the French government is able to control the direction of that discussion.
Of the investigation, yeah. Okay, obviously at some point we wanted to discuss Julian Assange.
Yes.
I think it's rather important. Obviously, one thing I heard recently, and it's true, Julian Assange should not be someone special. I mean, Julian Assange should be what all journalists should be. And they should investigate everything without political agenda, whatever it is.
Well, it's clear why Julian Assange is someone special in the eyes of the American government. He was responsible for an organization that revealed crimes, direct war crimes by the American government. That's what the American government is upset about. The reason he has to be not only suppressed himself and his organization suppressed, but he has to be made an example of, so other people will not do this sort of thing. This is a direct and
challenge.
It is a direct challenge, certainly, a vicious attempt to silence the press doing what the press should do, that is, revealing government crimes. People have compared what Assange and Chelsea Manning did with the Pentagon Papers.
Yes.
The revelation of this secret Pentagon account of the Vietnam War and how the Vietnam War came about, that was leaked and published in the Washington Post and the New York Times
1971 or
a while
73.
ago.
Somebody's needed 1971, 73 in that time frame, yeah.
The point is that you've got to stop this sort of thing if you're going to run a government which pretends that these crimes, that they're not committing this sort of crime. And the suppression of Assange, whatever else is involved, is a direct threat, a direct challenge to the freedom of the press. And in one way or another, it looks like the U.S. is going to get away with it. The martyrdom of Assange's own suffering, is distinct, but the crucial point is the suppression of a free press.
I don't think they're going to get away with it, because I believe that there are that Julian Assange, whether he realizes it or not, has some friends that have Trump's ear. And one of the friends I can mention is Tucker Carlson. And I haven't heard him say it explicitly, but I suspect that Sean Hannity would actually would actually support Assange, would catch you off guard. And these are people who I feel are powerful on the conservative side, who would have Trump's ear, Trump would say, "Oh my God, for political expediency, maybe I do have to get Assange out of the situation." So he'd be caught between people who want make an example of Assange, and other people who want to give him a pardon, get him out of there, whatever it is. And so I'm saying I think Assange is in a strange situation. Don't be so fast to say that he's going to be caught in a legal quagmire for decades, and that's the end of his life. Don't be so sure about that.
Well, your optimism does you credit, Ed.
Okay.
I hope you're right. It's hard to get a good account of what's going on because the press, the mainstream media, so quickly falls in line with this and is willing to believe with what the American government.
Well, they did. I mean, in the past, yeah.
In fact, one of the places where one gets a good account of how the case is proceeding is from RT. RT is the Russian equivalent of the BBC in Britain. RT, which you can, with some effort, get on the web, gives a coverage to this matter that so far has been remarkably clear and detailed, and has avoided the obfuscation that we get from mainstream media. Other strange places have done that too. We were talking before we went on the air today about Tucker Carlson.
Oh, yeah, Tucker Carlson. Yeah,
Fox
no,
News
well,
has been giving an
a,
accurate account.
oh, on Fox News, yeah, absolutely. There's a YouTube video where he supports Assange 100%. I mean, he doesn't. There's no equivocation. It's like, huh? I mean, for 12 minutes,
Right.
he just completely defends him. And even the fact that even Jimmy Dore, where he analyzes the Tucker Carlson video, and he's like, Jimmy Dore is like in a state of shock. He's like, what the hell?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, how is it possible that this guy gets it right and all the mainstream media gets it wrong? I mean, how is this possible? And so Jimmy Dore it was obviously a progressive, and it would, when they did politically disagree, but I mean, he's shocked by the sort of events or not the way it's transpiring.
Another good place to get an update on this is RT's Crosstalk program,
Yes.
Which you can get on YouTube,
Yep.
Which gives a good summary of where things stands and why Assange was arrested. It's quite clear that Chelsea Manning, was put back into prison to provide the U.S. with a case against Assange. If Manning could be forced to claim that Assange helped provide access to systems which held the sensitive material that Manning leaked to WikiLeaks, sensitive material meaning account of American war crimes, Assange could more easily be portrayed as a leaker, not just a journalist, and jailed, as was Manning. Once again, the YouTube accounts through RT and other news sites are what's necessary here. They describe, for example, how the corporate and corporate-friendly media, what we often refer to as mainstream media, turned on WikiLeaks and Assange. He went from celebrated leaker,
Yep.
and the British and American press particularly, to, quote, useful idiot, close quote, useful idiot of the enemies of the United States. Interesting that these same news organizations, despite being given a warning that something was about to happen to Assange in hours or days, as WikiLeaks said last week, couldn't be bothered to set a dead rolling camera outside the Ecuadorian embassy. RT's Rupley did do that, and that's why these news organizations are now forced to license Rupley's footage of Assange being forced out of the embassy. All other organizations had left the scene. You've seen the pictures on television, probably.
I did not know that.
Of Assange being dragged out of his asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy. That's not from the BBC or from an American news
RT.
outlet or anybody else. It's from RT.
Did not know that.
And the cream of the jest, if we can joke about such things, is that the mainstream media in the U.S. are paying RT license fees
Wow.
for what they observed of how the British cops violated the asylum of Julian Assange.
Yes, now they're consorting with Russians. Yes. Oh my God.
This actually has some interesting reverberations in British politics. I mean, there is the complex story of Brexit, of Britain withdrawing from the European Union that's underway at the moment, and the Tory government of Theresa May is in a great deal of difficulty and is ragingly unpopular as a result of it. The leader of the Labour Party, who will be the next Prime Minister of Britain if the election is allowed to continue, has spoken out against the Theresa May's government violation of Assange's asylum and his arrest. Corbyn said, quote, "I've made it very clear all along, if there are allegations which Julian Assange needs to answer of sexual issues that has to do with a case in Sweden, sexual attacks that may or may not have taken place in Sweden, then it's a matter for the courts to decide. But I do think he should answer those questions. My objection was to his extradition to the United States, because I do believe that WikiLeaks told us the truth about what was actually happening in Afghanistan and Iraq. This is the revelation of war crimes, of murder by American troops in Afghanistan and Iraq that Chelsea Manning provided to WikiLeaks, and WikiLeaks published. There are peculiar people involved in this, being, again, the actress Pamela Anderson, who is a friend of Assange's, said after Assange was dragged out of the Ecuadorian embassy, she said, "I'm in shock. I couldn't hear clearly what he said. He looks very bad. How could you, Ecuador? Because he exposed you? How could you, UK? Of course. You were America's bitch." That's a technical term in political matters. "You're America's bitch, and you need a diversion from your idiotic Brexit bull. And the USA? This toxic coward of a president, he needs to rally his base? You're selfish and cruel. You've taken the entire world backwards. You're devils and liars and thieves, and you will rot, and he will rise." Close quote. Pamela Anderson talking about Assange's arrest.
Would you say that one of the reasons why Ecuador changed because they had a change of government? I mean, with them last.
Well, the Ecuador case is peculiar. They did have a change in the government. I mean, it was former President Correa, who's a U of I graduate, by the way.
Oh, really?
Who was responsible for granting the asylum to Assange in the first place. He had a successor that he, with the unlikely name of Lenin, by the way, Lenin Moreno, his successor as president of Ecuador had been a follower of Correa's, and it was assumed that he would follow the same policies as Rafael Correa. That turned out not to be the case, and Correa was susceptible to the blandishments of the American government. People have suggested that included a good deal of cash as well, to end the to cut off Assange's internet connections and eventually to end his asylum. There was a particular case where President Moreno of Ecuador claimed that Assange and WikiLeaks had released compromising photographs of Lenin Moreno. Whether that's true or not, or whether that's just part of the same argument that ensued when when President Moreno began to suggest that he would kick Assange out of the embassy. This isn't clear, but the real issues, of course, are the United States' insistence that people not reveal the crimes of the United States military. That's the heart of the matter. And Assange, unfortunately, is caught in the midst of that as the head of WikiLeaks, which has done precisely that.
I find it kind of interesting how now that Assange has been captured, not captured. I mean, he's been dragged out of his asylum. Now I guess there's some progressives who are trying to defend his existence, even though they were attacking him before, as if the whole narrative was different. I mean, for the last 2 years. I mean, it's kind of twisted somehow. Anyway, I'll leave that alone.
Here are some quotations from the material that actually was revealed by WikiLeaks. Quote, "Oh yeah, look at those dead bastards," and "Ha ha, I hit him," say the pilots of a U.S. Apache helicopter in jubilant conversation as they machine gun Iraqi civilians on the ground in Baghdad on 12 July 2007. A wounded man, believed to be a Reuters photographer, that is a reporter, 22-year-old Namir Nouri Eldin, crawls towards a van. Quote, "Come on, buddy, all you have to do is pick up a weapon," says one of the helicopter crew, eager to resume the attack. A Hellfire missile is fired, and the pilot says, "Look at that bitch go." The photographer and his driver are killed. Later, the helicopter crew are told over the radio that they have killed 11 Iraqis and a small child has been injured. Quote, "Well, it's their fault for bringing their kids into battle," comments somebody about the carnage below. This is in the recording of the conversation among the pilots who were killing people on the ground.
Right.
Except there was no battle, and all those who died were civilians, though the Pentagon claimed they were gunmen. The trigger-happy pilots had apparently mistaken a camera for a rocket-propelled grenade launcher. Journalists in Baghdad, including myself, Patrick Coburn, who is writing this piece, were from the start skeptical about the official U.S. story because insurgents with weapons in their hands were unlikely to be standing chatting to each other in the street with an American helicopter overhead. As on many similar occasions in Iraq, our doubts were strong, but we could not prove that the civilians had not been carrying weapons in the face of categorical denials from the U.S. Department of Defense. It was known that a video of the killings taken from the helicopter existed, but the Pentagon refused to release it under the Freedom of Information Act. Plenty of people were being killed all over Iraq at the time, and the incident would soon have been forgotten, except by the families of the dead, if a U.S. soldier called Chelsea Manning had not handed over a copy of the official video to WikiLeaks, which published it in 2010. The exposure of the Baghdad helicopter killings was the first of many revelations which explain why Julian Assange has been pursued for so long by the U.S. and British governments. The claim by Theresa May, British Prime Minister, echoed by other ministers, that in the United Kingdom no one is above the law, is clearly an evasion of the real reasons why such efforts have been made to detain him on both sides of the Atlantic. Jeremy Corbyn, head of the Labour Party, was correct to say that the affair is all about, quote, the extradition of Julian Assange to the U.S. for exposing evidence of atrocities in Iraq and Afghanistan committed by American soldiers. But within hours of Assange detention, it was clear that nobody much cared about innocent people dying in the streets of Baghdad or in the villages of Afghanistan, and Assange has already become a political weapon in the poisonous political confrontation over Brexit in Britain, with Corbyn's support for Assange enabling the Conservative Party to claim that he is a security risk. Shades of Russiagate. Lost in this dogfight is what Assange and WikiLeaks really achieved, and why it was of great importance in establishing the truth about wars being fought on our behalf, in which hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. That's what Daniel Ellsberg did when he released the Pentagon Papers about the U.S. political and military involvement in Vietnam between 1945 and 1967. Like Assange, he exposed official lies and was accused of putting American lives in danger, though his accusers were typically elusive about how this was done. But unless the truth is told about the real nature of these wars, then people outside the war zones will never understand why they go on so long and are never won. Governments routinely lie in wartime, and it's essential to expose what they're really doing. Coburn writes, I remember looking at pictures of craters as big as houses in an Afghan village where 147 people had died in 2009, and which the U.S. Defense Secretary claimed had been caused by the Taliban throwing hand grenades. In one small area called Quyyara outside Mosul in 2016 and 17, the U.S. Air Force admitted to killing one civilian, but a meticulous examination of the facts by the New York Times, believe it or not, showed that the real figure was 43 dead civilians, including 19 men, 8 women, and 16 children aged 14 or under. These are the sorts of facts that the U.S. and U.K. governments try to conceal, and which Assange and WikiLeaks have repeatedly revealed. Readers should keep this in mind when they're told that Assange has narcissistic personality or was not treating his cat properly. So help me, this is what they were saying. If his personal vices were 100 times more serious than alleged, would they really counterbalance, and perhaps even discredit, the monstrosities he sought to unmask? The U.S. government documents published by WikiLeaks are about the real workings of power. Take the Hillary Clinton emails published in 2016. Much of the media attention has plugged in conspiracy theories about Russian involvement, or until the recent publication of the Mueller report, the possible complicity of the Trump election campaign with the Russians. Many Democrats and anti-Trump journalists managed to persuade themselves that Assange had helped lose Hillary Clinton the election, though a glance at the history of the campaign showed that she was quite capable of doing this all by herself by not campaigning in toss-up states.
Yep.
But look at what the emails tell us about the way the world really works. These are the supposed hacked emails from the from the Clinton campaign. There is, for example, a U.S. State Department memo dated 17 August 2014, just over a week after ISIS had launched its offensive against the Kurds and Yazidis in Iraq that led to the butchery, rape, and enslavement of so many. It was a time when the U.S. was adamantly denying that Saudi Arabia and Qatar had any connection with ISIS and similar jihadi movements like al-Qaeda. But the leaked memo, which is drawn from, quote, Western intelligence, U.S. intelligence, and sources in the region, close quote, tells us that they really knew different. It says, quote, we need to use our diplomatic and more traditional intelligence assets to bring pressure on the governments of Qatar and Saudi Arabia, which are providing clandestine financial and logistic support to ISIS and other radical groups in the region. This is the Obama administration admitting what was going on in the war in Syria. This is important information about the level of priority the U.S. gave to keeping in with its Saudi and Qatari allies while it was supposedly fighting the war on terror. This has been true since 9/11 and remains true today. But much of the British media, such issues are barely considered, and the debate is focused firmly on the reason why rape charges were not brought against Assange by Swedish courts and his culpability in taking refuge in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. Anybody who highlights the importance of the work which Assange and WikiLeaks has done is likely to be excused of being lightheartedly dismissive of the accusations of rape. Assange is likely to pay a higher price than Ellsberg, revealed the Pentagon Papers, for his exposure of government secrets. The Pentagon Papers were published when the media was becoming freer across the world, while now it's on the retreat as authoritarian governments replace democratic ones and lowercase d, and democratic governments become more authoritarian. The fate of Assange will be a good guide as to how far we're going down this road and the degree to which freedom of expression is threatened in Britain, as well as the United States, at a time of deepening political crisis. That's Patrick Coburn, probably the leading English language correspondent in the Middle East, writing about how Assange revelations are, WikiLeaks revelations of the crimes of the United States in the Middle East are the background of the attempt to suppress him that the American government is underway with right now.
I'm kind of hopeful that this suppression that you think is inevitable is not going to happen.
You're an optimist, Ed.
I'm more optimistic.
I hope you're right.
He's developed friendships with people that you might consider unusual who have Trump's ear.
Yeah, well, and once again, we have to remember that these things are ambiguous at best. One of the things that made Donald Trump president was the fact that he was the first major party candidate in more than a generation to attack the neoconservative, that is to say the pro-war principles of all previous administrations up to and very much including the Obama administration. During the campaign he attacked that, just as he attacked their economic policies.
I still appreciate the fact that he brought up the issue and made it very important, the concept of fake news. And it's no small matter. It's not a liberal thing. It's an issue that goes back decades. It goes back, like you just said, he's attacking previous administrations.
Right.
He's going back a long time.
Exactly right.
Attacks.
But then he goes ahead and appoints people like Pompeo and Bolton, who represent the worst part of that tradition of war making,
I don't know what to
and
tell you.
launches what is effectively a war against Venezuela, the oil producer, provokes war with Iran, which the previous administration had done a deal a deal that was supposed to reestablish on a quote more friendly close quote basis the control of oil in the Middle East that the U.S. had always insisted upon, and then turns around and says, and by the way, we should withdraw all the troops from Syria and Afghanistan. So the ambiguities, to put no finer point on it, the contradictions, if you prefer, of war policy of the Trump administration are bound up with the contradictions in Trump's own statements about that from the campaign on, and his apparent acquiescence to the war party represented by Pompeo and Bolton. Trump is in many ways a weak president, and we don't really talk about that very much. I mean, in terms of the things that he can do simply by fiat, by saying things, he's probably more comparable to Calvin Coolidge than any other presidents in the last century. Where he can do some things, we get the assertion of the wall, and where he can't do them, we get his comments about ending the wars.
Well, your definition of the word weak, I challenge that. I don't disagree.
My evidence is simply that he agree that he criticized the war tradition of all recent administrations, but in office he's even said we got to withdraw the troops, and it hasn't happened. That's the weakness I'm talking about.
I'll say that he appears as if he's all over the map. I truly believe that he is different from previous administrations.
That's different is right. The question is, how is he different? I agree with you. There are differences.
I just truly believe he's bringing up issues that is making the people, the deep state, whatever that is, angry, and they're upset. And they want to get him out of there as soon as possible. And as far as I'm concerned, they're going to fail miserably. But that's another story. That's really, I don't want to go there. But I truly believe he is something different from previous administrations, and I truly believe he's not as weak as you're making it out to be.
I hope you're right.
It's just that, unfortunately, he has to communicate his authority while dealing with a military-industrial complex that is still strong.
That I don't agree. I don't disagree a bit with that.
And unfortunately, it's still strong, so he has to play there. He's playing a multi-level chess game, and unfortunately, some of it moving the pieces is like, really? That's interesting. Really? He's moving his pieces like all over the place, and some of his movements are like are head scratchers, and some of his movements you would agree with, and then where's he going there? So I believe he's still dealing with forces that are still powerful and dangerous. And what am I supposed to say? These are the things that Eisenhower warned us about, unfortunately, and there it is. Because it was ignored all these decades.
I don't disagree with that at all.
Yeah.
I mean, in fact, that's why it seems to me much better to talk about foreign policy in terms of what the American government is doing. That the actual policy of the U.S., whom the U.S. is killing, depends upon the working out of these contradictions within the U.S. government, and Trump is only one part of that. So we've seen examples of Trump saying, I want all the troops out of Syria, and the Pentagon say, sorry, we're not going to do it. And they essentially said the same thing about Afghanistan. So it really reaches as public a statement as that, but that is the effect. So if we talk about what the United States is doing in making war, we're talking about the congeries of forces that come together to establish the fact that the U.S. is killing people in 8 countries around the world. Yeah. How that happens, how that results from the internal dynamics of the administration, academics will make money by writing books about that for a while. But for the moment, it has to do with who's getting killed and why the sorts of things that we were both talking about that Trump has said against American wars don't get acted on. Mm-hmm. Unfortunately, the things he says in favor of American wars, such as Venezuela and perhaps Iran, do get acted on, and that's a danger. You're watching Aware on the Air. We have a few minutes left here to talk about the
That's it.
events of the day.
We've
Anything else on your agenda, Ed, particularly?
Not seriously, but I wonder if you want to discuss some other issue, or you want to play one of your videos. I'm not sure if you want to go there. I don't know.
I think.
With 10 minutes to go.
Well, I think we may have just time to run in that video.
So yeah, okay. Well, 12
We
about
won't
12.
be able to show all of it, but we can.
But 10 minutes to
We
go.
can get some of it in, and that would be worthwhile.
Okay.
You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group, recorded in the studios of Urbana Public Television on April 16th, in the 16th week of 2019. Another week in which everyone can see that the most extensive global terrorism is U.S. worldwide war-making, for which its principal criminal associates these days are the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia and Israel. On this show, we try to concentrate on the shamefully underreported news of U.S. war-making. Thanks to my guest, Ed Bendell, our favorite Republican. Our show is produced and directed by Jason Liggett and Crofton Coleman with Andrew Scollery. Thanks to him also, this program and others like it will be available on YouTube and archive.org. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about but Americans don't. Assange, Manning, Snowden, and others who are truth-tellers persecuted by the U.S. government, and particularly, by the way, our liberal Democratic Senator Durbin, a shill for Russiagate propaganda and the attacks on WikiLeaks. We'll conclude tonight with an episode of Going Underground from RT, a talk with journalist and filmmaker John Pilger, who discusses the arrest of Julian Assange after his asylum status was revoked by President Lenin Moreno of Ecuador and his subsequent removal from the Ecuadorian embassy. Pilger discusses the importance of WikiLeaks' work, why it's a threat to the United States, the danger the arrest poses to journalists everywhere, and the possibility of extradition to the U.S. Next, they speak with Jeffrey Robertson, QC, a British lawyer, on the arrest of Assange, the legality of the revocation of his asylum status, the legality of the U.S. complying with the extradition request, and what this episode tells journalists around the world. This is Carl Estabrook for the members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, saying in the words of the late newsman Edward R. Murrow, good night and good luck.